Have you ever felt?
Are you listening? Damn.
Okay, we have a cool streamer that we're going to tie tonight. Posted a few pictures on Instagram, but here in the West where we're located, there are a bunch of whitefish in the streams, and so I've been playing with a whitefish variation. So it's a pretty cool pattern I've been playing with. It's got hackle for the tail, 2 hooks and a shank in the middle, and it's weighted. Let's see if you can see that, belly scratcher style. So anyway, it is kind of a long tie, so the video is going to be a little bit on the longer side, but there's a lot of explanation I want to do for this. So let's just get started. I've got a size 1 Gamakatsu B10S in the vise, and the front of the hook is going to actually be a size 2/0. And that's just so that I can get that taper that I want, a bigger head. I've got 210 denier spooled up in my fancy loon bobbin. So the first thing we're going to do is tie in these hackle fibers. So the hackle fibers that I have are these loon's the bobbin. The hackle fibers that I have are Whiting 4B Rooster saddle hackles. So the saddle looks like this. So this is kind of a variant, but you could use grizzly on this one, look really cool. But this is kind of a cool one that I got. That's more of a variant. So I pulled 3 of these, and I pulled these feathers from about, the mid portion of this saddle. Back here, these fibers are really super long, more like schlappen fibers. So right about the midpoint of the saddle. And so I'm going to take 3 of those and line them up as best I can and just tie those in maybe 2 hook lengths or hook shank lengths in length, and just hold those on one side of the hook and tie those in. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so that gives us a nice, deceiver style tail on this fly. So the next several steps that we're going to do are really simple. This fly isn't a hard fly. It just has a lot of steps to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stagger some polar chenille and some Arctic fox. Now, I'm going to use some Arctic fox that I got. I don't even know what kind of fox this is. Maybe somebody can comment, but it's got a nice kind of off-whitish color. But I think we'll put white in the recipe for this. But if you can get one of these full tails, you can get them for about $30. But if you can get one of these, get them, because they're really cool. But this is the one that I'm going to use for this fly. We'll see what we can do about getting them as well. But anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this, I think this is medium-sized. Is it medium? Yeah, the medium-sized polar chenille. And I'm just going to take it and wrap, I don't know, not very far up the hook shank, maybe about 2/3 the way up, maybe halfway, and tie that off. And from here, I'm going to kind of come in here and taper those fibers down. So keep in mind we're building a bait fish that's about this long, and I want to build up a taper up to the head. Okay, so this is where we start playing with the fox. So I'm going to take a kind of a pretty sparse chunk out at first. And these hair scissors from Loon make all the difference. Maybe not all the difference, but they're really good for working with hair. So I cut a clump off, and it's kind of messy, so I'm just going to take a comb and brush that out. And then on these back portions, I'm going to take out the guard hairs too. So if you just pinch at the base and pull these guard hair fibers out, then you're good to go. So now I'm going to measure that. I want that fiber to go about that far back. So I'll pre-measure, cut that, and then to add body to this fly, I'm going to tie it in reverse style. So what I'm going to do is just kind of flatten it out a little bit and just lay it kind of right on top of where I want to tie it and use all my fingers to hold it down. And then this first wrap, it has no tension at all. And I'll just tie that down. Now, this little back section back here, you can come in and trim it off. I'll probably do it just because, but you don't need to. Okay, so once you have it, kind of look at your fly from the front and then push that back. And this is the reverse tie. So it's like what you've seen guys do with bucktail, but we're just doing it with Arctic fox. So I'm going to build up a little bit of thread in front of that, and now that will sweep back and kind of stick out a bit, but that's fine. I'm going to actually build up a little bit more. Okay, so that's about how we're looking so far. Okay, at this point, we'll put in some more of this medium-sized chenille. And we'll wrap it almost up to the eye. And to speed things up, I'll just use the rotary function. Maybe not. That's why I don't use the rotary sometimes on this, because the chenille can start to twist and then you bind fibers down. And you don't want to really stack these wraps too close together. You want to give it some breathing room. You don't want a super dense body. So I'm going to leave about that much space and trim it off. We'll do the same thing with the Arctic fox. Okay, now when I tie this Arctic fox in, I want it to go maybe about to the halfway point of this clump of fox. And I got quite a bit here, so I'm going to actually take some of this and set it aside for one of the other clumps. Okay, and when you're up by the eye of the hook on this, you can actually take the clump and just jam it over the top of the eye here. Just like that. And then tie that down. And I'm not going to trim the polar flash or the polar chenille on this next section, just like you saw. We're pretty evenly distributed. So, and the other technique here is when you pull this back, you just kind of jam your thread up through it. You will look like you're catching a few fibers, but not a big deal. You can see that kind of blends nicely into the other chunk. We'll brush that out just a little bit. And now we're going to take some Flashabou. This is color 6946. It's called Moonlight. I just write the name on the back of these. And then take, 5 or 6 or 7 fibers and cut those off and tie them in. So I'm going to lay that about the length of the whole fly so far and tie it in so there's a bunch going over the front, and then just pull that back and whip finish. I don't have my head cement at this desk, so I'm just going to pretend like I'm putting head cement on. Okay, so I have one of these fish skull articulated shanks in 35 millimeter. You could probably get away with a 25 as well on this fly. And so you just hook it through there. And you'll see that I've got magnets on the Regal. I like it because you can move the magnet up even underneath the material clip. So when I stick this in here, I should be able to get the magnet close enough to that back section that I can hold it down. Okay, so I'm just going to take those fibers and clip them down with a hair clip. Okay, I've got this clip down with a hair clip, and now I'm just going to start my thread on this portion of the shank and get it closed up. A little bit crooked. There we go. Alright, so now what we're going to do is, if you try to wrap your thread up this big gap, your thread will just slide down. So if you just take a little bit of super glue and put that on the actual metal that you're going to wrap up, it'll help your thread stick to it a little bit better. So just like that. Okay, so the idea of the rest of the fly is we're going to stagger polar chenille, fox, polar chenille, fox. So we have fox right at the eye of the back of the hook. So the next step would be add more polar chenille. So this I'm going to switch to the large size now. And I'll wrap it to about, a third of the way up the hook shank. Okay, now I'm going to select another chunk of hair, do the same thing. The only reason I take the guard hairs out is because it kind of reduces the length a little bit. So we want that to go about halfway over the previous section. We'll repeat that step. One thing that you'll see here is I'm going to kind of come in and taper these pieces of Flashabou just so that they're not flat and straight. Okay, so I've got the front hook dressed, and usually I would take some articulation wire and connect the rest of the fly on. But I got to give Schultzy over at Schultz Outfitters a shout out, because he used just a shank on the back of his on his swing and D fly. I was watching one of the tutorials, and that will actually increase the durability of this fly. I mean, I've talked about this before, but streamers really are investments. I mean, you're putting a lot of time and effort, expensive materials into this. So if you can do something to make them last longer, then go for it. So what I'm gonna do is just take some, I got needle nose pliers with some wire cutters on them, and I'm just gonna cut that eye off. So we've basically got that. And before we tie it in, we probably better put our hook on there. Now, here's a critical part. The flash part is the top of the fly. So this fly is going to ride with one hook up and one hook down. So essentially this fly, I'm tying it upside down right now. So I am going to put the back section of the fly on with the back hook facing up as it's in my vise. So this is actually kind of a cool method. Sure, it maybe burns through shanks faster than you want, but if you want the ultimate in durability, I mean, that's how to do it right there. So it's just sitting right on the side of my hook. Sure, it's a little bit off center, but it's not going to matter. Okay, then I'm going to take this big magnet and put it back further on the vise. And I'm going to protect my hand by putting that clip over it. Hopefully it stays there. Anyway, so we're ready to do the back section, or the front section of the fly. Again, we stopped with Arctic Fox, so we're going to start with some polar chenille. So this portion of the fly we want to be a little bit more dense. So this time I'm going to pick the longest section of the Arctic Fox chunk. As you'll see, even with like this one right here, the bottom of the tail tends to be a little bit shorter than the top. So this one's actually pretty uniform, but you'll get chunks of Arctic Fox where it's got shorter fibers and longer fibers. So just be aware of that. You want to pick the longest fibers that you've got. So I've got those chunkers right there, and I'll tie those in. Now on this section of Arctic Fox, I'm not going to take out the guard fibers. I want to leave those in there because I want this to be longer than the others. So just about like that is where I'll cut it and tie it in. Okay, so just like that. And after you tie it in, you can still distribute the hair. Like if you feel you got too much on the bottom or too much on the top or wherever, you can kind of move it around still. All right. So this is where we're going to put our belly scratcher weighting system. So I'm just going to take a piece of articulation wire. And I need to adjust this now to hold this back. So we'll tie in our articulation wire with just a little bit going over the front. And I'll just double that back over and secure it down. If you don't do that, then it will pull out, and then you've got a fly that's not the greatest because it won't swim right. So I'll super glue that down, and then I'll wrap forward with more polar chenille. Okay, for the weighting on this, I'm going to use two 4.6 millimeter tungsten beads, and I'm just going to use copper, just because that's what I got. I ran out of gold. And I dropped one. Okay, now you can kind of come in here and part your polar chenille. It's not going to matter too much, and then just draw all those fibers back and tie down your wire. And those beads are still kind of loose, so once you have a few wraps, just give it a nice little tug and it will move forward. And then you're going to fold that wire back over itself and trim it off. So now I'm going to put some more Arctic Fox on, and then we're going to finish with the head of Bruiser Blend. And Bruiser Blend and Arctic Fox really complement each other really well. So another healthy clump. Brush out the junk. And now this one I want to just kind of make as long as I possibly can. So I'm just going to trim the ends flush. And tie it in pretty long. Okay. And this fly looks terrible so far. I mean, I've got a clip in it, just got hair and flash going everywhere. And just like a lot of good streamers, it really doesn't look like much until we put the final touches on it. Okay, so keep in mind now that this is now the top of the fly. So I'm going to take this flash and I'll stick it in on that side. And I'll tie it with maybe a little bit more going out the front than the back. That way when I fold this chunk over, it's going to be longer. That almost reached the back of the fly, so that's perfect. And then I'll trim those up. That part probably doesn't matter a whole lot. Okay, now I'm going to add like some little fins to it. I've been playing with the 4B Rooster saddle, so I grabbed a few more fibers from it, from just a little bit higher up in the saddle than the part where I grabbed the tails. And I'm going to tie those in so that they're about halfway down the fly. So that's pretty messy. Perfect. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. And I'll measure kind of where my tie-in point needs to be, and throw those bad boys in there just like that. Okay, I'm going to see if I can tidy up some of this crap up here. Okay, I'm going to throw down some super glue now, because the fly is basically done with the hard part anyway. Now we just got to throw on a bruiser blend head and some eyes. Okay, just like a lot of my bait fish patterns, I'm using Alpha Wolf and Cream, and you can see when I pull these out of the bag, they're all crinkled up, so you got to take it and kind of straighten the fibers. Not really straighten, but align the fibers. And if you do this, 6 or 7 times, your fibers are nice and straight. And perfect for a little bait fish head. Okay. So since this is a pretty big fly, I'm actually going to take the bruiser blend and just kind of flatten it out just a little bit. But I'm going to tie it in further toward the back than in the middle. And what that does is when I fold this over, there's more fiber there, so it makes kind of a bigger head. So just a few snug wraps, and that fiber stays right on top. And then we'll do the same thing with the cream. Okay, so now we're ready to create this head. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take one color, or the top color, and kind of pull it back and hold it with my fingers like this. And then I'm going to bring my thread straight up, and then you kind of have to be Houdini and grab the rest of it with your other finger. And then just wrap down in front of those. And it's not going to look good until we get it combed and the eyes glued on. So don't worry about that. It doesn't have to look perfect. Okay. So, looks terrible right now. And that's pretty generous clumping of bruiser blend, but when I brush it out, some of it will come out in the comb. Okay, so we've got a pretty good little bait fish head going on now. And those little hackle jobbers should just barely kind of be showing through. Okay, now what I'm going to do is color the top with a Delta Brown chart pack marker. And kind of get in there and be aggressive up at the head and fade it back, and then just take your fingers and fade that back into the rest of the color. That kind of just darkens up the head a little bit. And then for the bottom, I like using the goldenrod color and just kind of feather that back as well. Maybe get a little bit more concentrated at the head and blend those colors back now. So you can see that kind of makes a cool thing, a cool little transition. I'm actually going to add a little bit lighter color back here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is just put the eyes on. We got the good old tear mender, put it in a loon applicator bottle, and that makes life a lot easier to deal with this stuff, because it can be a pain. So for the eyes, I use these Super Pearl eyes on pretty much everything that I've been using lately. Mostly just because they kind of take the color of the fly that you're putting it on. So whitefish kind of have goldish eyes, and I don't know, this kind of is a translucent color. It'll kind of blend into the dark and the gold, or the goldenrod. So I'll just get one of the eyes ready and stick it on my thumb, and then I'm going to come in here with the tear mender and saturate a portion of the head for the eye. So it should look just like that. If you try to do that with a big bottle of tear mender, well, on this fly it probably wouldn't be too bad, but on a smaller fly it can be really hard. And then I'm just going to put that eye right up by the eye of that hook, just like that. And I'm not going to push it in place quite yet till I get the other one on. Okay, and then I'm just going to lightly squeeze with my fingers here. And it should take just a few seconds for that tear mender to start doing its job. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a thin Sharpie and just come in here behind the eye and make the line of the gill plate. Just like that. Okay, so that's it. That's the Wiggle Whitey. But anyway, it's a pretty killer pattern in the water. I mean, moves really, really well. You got a lot of materials in here that really push water well. So tie this in this color. It also, I did a few in like black and olive with red flash, and it was just absolutely killer. So anyway, there's the bug. Go tie it. Have a good time with it.
Damn.